Birdemic, The Room, The Final Sacrifice. What do all these movies have in common? They're perfect examples of movies that are so bad, they're good. The Magical Legend of the Leprechauns is no different. It was a TV movie made in 1999 by Hallmark Entertainment. It starred Randy Quaid and is a rom-com mix between Lord of the Rings and Romeo and Juliet. But what makes this movie so bad it's good? Part 1 begins with you meeting Jack Woods. You don't know much about him yet, but from what you gather, he's in Ireland for a business trip. He rents a house from a local, and as a gift, the local gives him a bottle of alcohol.
Best not drunk close to a flame, and try not to let it touch your gums on the way down.
While he's walking around a nearby forest, he sees a woman taking a bath in a river. She sees him and throws some rocks at him as he hops away. Later that evening, Jack decides to try the alcohol given to him earlier. But he ends up falling up backwards and passing out by gently hitting his head on the oven. When he wakes up, he sees a little dude run out of his house. He chases him around for a little bit and eventually saves him from drowning. When he takes the little guy back to his house, he finds out he's a leprechaun.
You're
A leprechaun.
His wife then appears and then scolds him for being saved, and the leprechaun explains that he's in debt to him because he saved him.
When a mortal saves a leprechaun, then that leprechaun is in his debt forever and a day.
The next scene follows Mickey, the son of the leprechaun that got saved.
Hello there!
He meets some of his friends, but the scene is interrupted by a Dullahan who says some borderline meaningless dialogue and you really never see it again. This is something you have to get used to with this film, is that there are a lot of characters you see and then never see again. You find out that the leprechauns have a rivalry with the fairies, similar to the Capulets and Montagues in Romeo and Juliet. They kind of spat at each other for a little bit.
I'll flatten you without raising a sweat.
Oh, we're all trembling before Sean Devine. A powerful man with a powerful set of eyebrows.
Yo! Oh, he dead for sure!
And then they have a lame staff fight of sorts.
I want you to kill everyone over there! And I want you to kill everybody over there! And nobody goes until I say! Hold! Hold!
Cut back to Jack, and the leprechaun that he saved earlier basically becomes a dialogue NPC and gives some information on the fairies.
So you don't like them?
Like them. They are the natural enemy of the leprechaun. Just because they look after nature and make a few flowers grow and get the odd tree the right way up, they think they're better than the rest of us.
Cut to the fairies, and they're discussing how they also hate the leprechauns. They talk about what they could do about the leprechauns, and the Green Banshee flies in the room. The Green Banshee is played by none other than
If this war does not stop, you will all pay the ultimate price, and you know what I mean.
Back to Jack, and he's taking pictures of the countryside. The leprechaun appears next to him and tells him that that lady he saw earlier lives nearby. Jack then decides to go up to her house and start taking pictures of her house. He even goes so far as to trespass on her yard. Little reminder that Jack is the protagonist. He He's supposed to be the person that the audience cheers on. And the 3 major scenes that we've seen him in, 2 of them he's done pretty creepy things, one of which is trespassing on other people's property. She yells for her brothers, and they end up chasing him off the property and into the church. The priest yells at them to sit down, and the chase is forced to stop. After the sermon, Jack talks to the priest in order to get out of having to deal with the brothers.
That was a very inspiring sermon, Father.
Sometime later, Jack goes to a local state fair and hopes that Catherine is there and he can clear his name.
Don't want her walking around thinking I'm some kind of a creep.
Notice how he said sometime later. That's because this film has no sense of time at all. I have no idea how long this film takes place overall. This story could last a month, a year, a couple weeks, a couple days, I have no idea. He ends up finding Kathleen, and Kathleen accuses him of peeping and trespassing on her. And as a result, we get this amazing gem of dialogue.
Are you a peeping Tom, as she says? Nope. Fair enough.
Just the logic on that seems a little off of the chart.
However, he ends up apologizing to her regardless.
I'm sorry, Miss Fitzpatrick.
Back to the Leprechauns, and they decide to ride some poorly CGI'd sheep.
Come on! Go faster! Come on now!
The sheep drops them off at this tavern where they discuss any mischief they might get up to tonight.
Blossom shaking would be good.
No.
They decide that they're going to crash this event called the Grand Ball that the fairies are hosting.
What about we sneak up into the Grand Midsummer Ball up at the castle? It's the event of all the year for all the troop and fairies.
Ah, good on you, Mickey.
Before they can discuss any plans, some ghillie suit mutants flip into the bar. After the random dance scene, the Leprechauns are making plans to sneak into the ball. They find some fairies to beat up, and they take their masks and clothes. One fraud bubble elevator ride up to the castle later, and they're in the Grand Ball. Mickey ends up taking a liking to one of the fairies, and they go out and awkwardly flirt for a little bit. She tells him to take off the mask, and he reveals that he's a leprechaun.
But you're a leprechaun. A real one.
I am.
They both decide to get over the whole fairies versus leprechauns thing for their love, and they head back into the ball. It's at this moment when the fairies figure out that some leprechauns crashed the party.
By whom?
By who?
Leprechaun.
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 Is in the base.
The leprechauns end up escaping by figuring out that leprechauns can fly when they are in love.
I'm doing it. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this, Mickey lad, but you're in love.
It also helps the leprechauns that the fairies happen to forget that they can fly all of a sudden, even though we've seen them fly in multiple times in multiple scenes. Mickey makes his way back to the cottage and has a talk with his dad about the new princess he loves. His dad discourages the love because the whole fairies versus leprechauns rivalry.
No, listen to it. You leave her be!
Meanwhile, in the human plotline, the town is having their annual horse race. Kathleen wants to race, but isn't allowed to because...
You're a little lady.
For plot reasons you'll understand soon, Jack needs to win the race, and the writers needed a way for Kathleen to not be in the race.
You drive for me.
Deja vu, I've just been in this place before. Higher on the street, and I know it's my time to go. Going new, and the search is a mystery. Standing on my feet, it's so hard when I try to be me. Whoa, deja vu, I've just been in this time before. Higher on the beat, and I know it's a place to go. Going new, and the search is a mystery. Standing on my feet, it's so hard when I try to be me. Yeah.
They end up going on a date where they have some cringy small talk, and then they plan another date where they have more cringy small talk. Back to the leprechauns, and the friends of Mickey are trying to talk him out of loving the princess. The scene doesn't really add anything except for the most horrifying CGI tree ent things ever.
So you won't listen to me.
Listen to him, Mickey.
Mickey ignores his father and friends and decides to go on a date with the fairy princess. But before they can make their getaway, they're stopped by some guards that chase after Mickey. What ensues is known as one of the greatest chase scenes of all time. Mickey makes it back to the pub and meets back up with his leprechaun friends. The fairies discover where Mickey is and try to pick a fight with him. Another blunt staff fight follows.
I don't feel so well. I feel doomy somehow.
It turns out that one of the consequences of the leprechauns and fairies fighting is that they're no longer immortal as mentioned before. In a fit of rage, Mickey ends up killing a fairy. The news that Mickey killed one of the fairies gets out, and the parents of Jessica get worried and send her off to hide.
Jessica, get packed. We're sending you away.
In the leprechaun pub, the leprechauns are mourning the loss of the leprechaun guy that nobody in the audience remembers. I mean, I've watched this movie 3 times now, and I still don't remember his name. Anyway, the leprechauns are angry and decide to have a war against the fairies.
Fight!
Jack finds out he's supposed to go back to America right away, but as he's about to leave, the weather starts acting all crazy because of the war. Kathleen also meets the leprechauns, and freaks out. The fairies and leprechauns are getting ready to go to war, and both Jack and Kat are sad that Jack has to go back to America. Also, as Jack is leaving, this happens. As part 1 comes to an end, the war is about to happen, and Jack is about to leave on the train. Now, before we go on to part 2, I want you to think. How much impact have these 2 plotlines had on each other? Part 2 starts with a random shot of the cabin that Jack stays in. It then cuts to the ensuing war between the fairies and the leprechauns. Also, is it just me, or does the general of the fairies look like he's attacking his own army? Back in the human plotline, Jack decides to stay in Ireland. Kathleen is there, and the 2 decide to hug, kiss, and smooch. Back at the war, flowers start to die because no one is looking after nature.
If we're all fighting, there'll be no one left to look after nature.
Whoopi Goldberg comes down and gives everyone a shameful look while everyone goes to take a lunch break. In the next scene, Jack and Kat are hanging out together, and we find out that Kathleen would have gone to America.
Were you going to come with me, or were you just coming to see if I was going?
I had my bag, didn't I?
I have several problems with this. One, being that she's going to another country with very little planning by herself. 2, she's going with a guy who she has known for, I don't know, a week? Why would you do this? The Leprechaun King pops up and explains the whole war situation to Jack. He He then asks Jack if he can train his army so that he'll have a bit more of a chance in the next war.
Whichever side you're on in a war is always the noble one.
Yeah.
He says that as a reward for training his army, he'll give Jack some of the pots of gold that the leprechauns have.
Maybe you wouldn't leave empty-handed. We still have a few pots of gold left.
Later, Mickey finds where Jessica is being held, and they run off together. They decide to run off into the fire swamp? What? They decide to run off into the swamp because it's neutral territory in the war. In the swamp, they meet this thing called a butter spirit.
Why are they called butter spirits?
Because all they care about is butter. Sir Aloysius Genty at your service.
Back at the fairy castle, the caretaker for Jessica reports that she went missing, and the fairies attempt humor. Then there's a montage of nature freaking out and all the bad things are happening because of the war. And no one in the human world really knows why it's happening or what to do.
Could it be the state of the economy, Father? Or maybe the railways?
Jack and Kat have a fight because Kat found out that Jack was originally sent to Ireland to plan out construction of stuff in the farmland. And Kat gets upset because that would mean her farm goes away, and Woods is sad and decides not to go through with this job anyway. The Leprechaun King comes to talk to Jack, and they strike a deal that the Leprechaun will talk to Kat and Jack will train the Leprechauns. Kat's brothers end up training the Leprechauns instead because they need the gold. The brothers try to train the Leprechauns, and Kat and Jack get in another fight.
No!
Next, both the Leprechauns and fairies are planning for the next fight, and there's another random dance scene in the Leprechaun camp. Mickey and Jessica get together with Jack and Kathleen and explain their situation. They decide they're going to go talk to Whoopi Goldberg and see if she can help stop the war. They travel up this mountain and Jack and Kathleen gain each other's trust. Kinda, sorta.
Can't hold on much longer.
Thank you.
What, that's it? Just thank you?
Remember this scene for later. They eventually come to an entrance to a cave and this bad CGI Human Torch guy pops out. They eventually get past him and meet Whoopi Goldberg. Whoopi Goldberg says that she can't stop the war and that Mother Nature is dying because no one is looking after her. So Jessica and Mickey have to find a way to stop the war fast.
From here, I can see Mother Nature herself.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Another fight breaks out between the Leprechauns and fairies as the Leprechauns slingshot their way onto the fairy castle. Mickey and Jessica are getting desperate to stop the war, and they do this thing that should stop their love. It doesn't work, and they end up kissing a lot. Kathleen's brothers are looking for the pot of gold that the Leprechaun promised them, and Jack and Kat decide to go to the swamp and try to find Mickey and Jessica. Mickey and Jessica are looking for a way to stop the war, and they find out about these potions that will basically kill themselves, but they can unkill themselves within 10 minutes if they drink another potion.
Provided you drink it within 10 minutes of taking the poison. If you don't, no more cricket on the green, no more warm beer, no more butter.
Jack then gets himself caught in a tornado where he's saved by Whoopi Goldberg. And you know what he says to Whoopi Goldberg after she saved his life?
Thanks.
And do you remember what he said to Kathleen?
Just thank you.
Both the fairies and leprechauns get news that Jessica and Mickey are going to basically kill themselves if they don't end the war, and both sides are freaking out. They meet up and end up fighting again, so the prince and princesses end up killing themselves.
There's nothing like a Coca-Cola, nothing like a Coke.
They decide to stop the war after seeing that they actually went through with it, and Jack signals Kathleen to bring over the antidote. While she's riding to give the antidote, a random sinkhole pops up and the horse stops. She goes flying out and the antidote breaks. Jack runs over to help her, but he jumps over the pit, hits the horse, and falls into the sinkhole. The leprechauns and fairies help him out, and with the power of the Grand Banshee, the prince and princess come back to life. Also, everyone who died comes back to life as well because it's a Hallmark movie and death isn't real. Back at the ranch, Leprechaun shows what the real pot of gold is, and the brothers strike oil. This is kind of ridiculous, as Cat was upset about saving the farm, but in order to farm oil, you also need to have a big oil rig. So, in the end, the prince and princess marry each other, and it's a happily ever after story. Going back to the beginning of the video, what does make this movie so bad it's good? What made this terrible movie entertaining to watch, as opposed to a terrible movie that's just bad? I did some thinking, and as far as I can tell, it's the plot. What other movie can you have a boring romance and then suddenly jump to a horse race? Before you can even comprehend what happened, there's a huge war going on between two mythical races. When I saw this movie for the first time, I was kind of on the edge of my seat to see what happened next. It almost reminded me of Monty Python. The only difference being Monty Python is still somewhat popular and Randy Quaid seems to have lost his mind.
The fake news media has never been more dishonest than it is today.
Crazy all night.